Good afternoon, everyone. Friday afternoon in downtown Honolulu. Ted Ralston here, your host on Where the Road Leads. Probably someplace in the world it's 4 o'clock. Right here it's 4:15, so we're running a little late thanks to some traffic situations out there, but stay with us and I think we will find ourselves in, once again, an excellent panel here. This show, as you know, is defined by the panels it keeps, and that panel is the people we have on. I'd like to introduce our guest for today. First of all, to my left is Frencha Kalilimoku, who we've mentioned probably 10 times on this show in the past. We finally actually got you here.
Thank you.
That's the first time, Frencha, so we're glad to have you here. Frencha runs the Waimanalo HHARP, Hawaii Hazards Awareness and Resilience Program. And if anybody was ever going to be nominated to be the mayor of Waimanalo, that would probably be Frencha. And so we're so glad to have you on for the work you've done and where you're going to take us in the future for those of us who live in Waimanalo. We have also Penehuro Lafale from New Zealand, associated with Massey University and Bodecker Scientific. And Penny's been here this week for as a New Zealand representative on the PRIMO, the Pacific Risk Management Ohana activity, and sees things from the global perspective and certainly from the New Zealand perspective. And New Zealand arguably is well ahead of other areas in dealing with disasters which come frequently in various forms to New Zealand. So we have the global look and we have the village look together here on the same panel. Then we have Kevin Richards from, used to be called Civil Defense, now called the State Emergency Management Agency.
Hawaii Emergency Management Agency.
Hawaii Emergency Management. Okay,
yeah, we dropped the state. Yeah, we stopped the state.
Kevin has a great way to express things. And when you go to Kevin's classes, you get very clear presentations and you get the foot stomping when it's time for really important points. So I've learned from you that style of delivery, Kevin, and I thank you very much for that. But
I appreciate it.
Your old civil defense organization and now the Emergency Management Agency is tasked with bringing together these initiatives at the state level, and we'll hear from you a little bit more about that. But if we can, let's go ahead and start with Penny, if you don't mind. Penny, just tell us a little bit about PRIMO and how we think of the situations here in Hawaii that you know about that are at our level, and how they relate to the picture at the larger level that we've experienced in terms of disaster circumstances in the Pacific.
Kia ora, and thank you very much for bringing me here in this really crucial panel. PRIMO, as you rightly pointed out, is the Pacific Risk Management Ohana, and it's basically based on the premise that, it's a coalition of the willing. It's a lot of the work is volunteer, like my time here and my preparation to come over here. I have to volunteer my time to be here. And I'm happy to say that I'm one of the founding members of PRIMO, and I've been right from the beginning and seeing it crawling and starting to stand up and moving ahead, and it's been great to be here. In regards to Hawaii and what I understand, I've been coming here since the mid-1980s, so I'm like becoming a local, and I guess, and rightly so, I end up marrying a local researcher from the University of Hawaii. She's, Dr. Cheryl Anderson from the Social Science Research and Director of the Natural Hazards Program and Climate Change. So I guess we have a lot of similar interests. I'm a physical scientist and she's a social scientist. So we do a lot of work together. I guess New Zealand, mainly from an indigenous perspective, they're so similar in every way. The culture between the Maori people and the Hawaiians is absolutely sort of together in many respects. And you just have to draw the Polynesian Triangle from New Zealand up to Hawaii and then to the east to Easter Island, and all similar in many ways. So when you're talking about resilience, I think the the way that it's been framed at the academic level at this stage is setting a lot of challenges for Indigenous communities, because people have been in these places for a long, long time. And I think that knowledge system needs to be relooked at. That's one key lesson I learned in my area. And so the work I do is mainly on the climate change area, modeling and trends analysis. But I was drawn into looking at different ways of knowing, because we realized that we cannot just solve the problem just by physical science alone. It's a multi-disciplinary problem that needs to be dealt at all levels of society.
And that's a subject that deserves a panel of its own. In fact, a whole career track of its own. How to take traditional wisdom and traditional response to changing circumstances, and how is that converted into governance and into land management, into population management. And that then leads us to from the Pacific scale to the local scale, and we have Frencha.
Yes.
Frencha, how did you get, Penny talked about the coalition of the willing. There's no person more willing than this one right here, Frencha to my left, and ably assisted by Kevin on the end. How did you get so involved in the Waimanalo harp? And tell us your experiences in that.
Actually, it took Tohoku, Japan, their earthquake and tsunami, to give me my wake-up call and decide that I needed to do something. So I approached our neighborhood board and asked them what they were doing for our coastal community of Waimanalo for emergency preparedness. Unfortunately, the answer I got was not one that I was looking for. So as such, even if I walked away feeling a little disappointed, in the room was the National Guard's Colonel, Commander Colonel Suzanne Varislum, who actually heard my cry for help for our community of Waimanalo. As such, she conversed with the then State Civil Defense, now Hawaii Emergency Management Agency, that she found someone in Waimanalo that could be the spark plug. Got a call, had a meeting, and HARP began in Waimanalo in January 2014. And we've been going forward ever since then, educating our community members who have attended with the various hazards that could affect the Hawaiian island chains, as such earthquakes, tsunamis, floods, as well as hurricanes.
So HARP will never end. It keeps going. It'll keep incorporating new ideas as population moves into Waimanalo, as the tourism develops, as the Pacific subjects itself become subject to the temperature rise and the sea level rise and such. So HARP will continue evolving and moving forward. It's not a done deal.
No, it's an ongoing process.
Right. But you're about ready to hit a major milestone.
We are.
Yeah, okay.
We're so excited because we have a group of committee members from the community that's focusing on getting our preparedness plan ready for Waimanalo, so that we can hit major milestone of being a tsunami-ready community, a storm-ready community, and we're looking towards being the first HARP resilience community recognized. So.
That's pretty impressive to have done in a year and a half.
Thank you.
And what a perfect example of what you just said, Penny, the coalition of the willing. And here's number one on the hit parade of the willing to step forward, take that action. In fact, what strikes me, and all of us who were at Primo heard Jim Wildcat talk about not only do we have a inalienable set of rights, we also have an inalienable set of responsibilities. And that is a perfect example of that. And I'm glad we were able to know you through that. My wife, I think, was much interested in that as well. And we learned from you, and we'll forever enjoy the warmth of that whole thought, and just want to watch you as this all moves forward.
Thank you.
And Kevin represents the state agency that's sort of picked up this ball and organizing it and putting the parameters in place and the training in place that supports the community of the willing.
Well, I I, like Penny, it's a requirement that I'm actually here, because there is that responsibility that you speak of. I was responsible from the state's perspective to look in the community for possible ways to develop resilience, or just basically knowledge and self-awareness of what they could do. And there were a couple programs, Tsunami Ready being one and Storm Ready, that both come out of a NOAA funding source. The problem with those is they didn't answer what the communities actually wanted. They weren't broad enough. One of them dealt with just hurricanes, and the other one dealt with just tsunamis. And right away, there were the willing, they were there, but they only were energized for so long because this was just one subject matter that they could deal with. And they really, if they're gonna, and I caught on real quick, if they're gonna put their time into an effort, it's not gonna be a focused effort. It's gonna be as broad as they can make it. It's gonna cover as many areas as they can. So what we did in the office was, hey, maybe we can design our own program based on these government issued programs, which, by the way, are very heavy on the requirements reporting back up through the system. And that's not what we really want to burden the spark plugs, and for lack of a better word, that's what we were calling them, is because that was the energy in the community. And one of the first things we wanted to do when we advanced into the communities was to find a person that is just Frencha, basically, that was willing to take their community seriously and move forward, because one of the pillars of this program is, when it's all said and done, it's not Kevin Richards, thank you on behalf, the state, you guys helped us so much, you did such a great job. It's Frencha shaking the hand of her neighbor because they've learned to help each other. They've learned to develop that knowledge of each other. That's one of the core elements. The other elements, obviously, is, and I know you've covered this before in your show, but it needs to be said in setting some foundations. There are a couple other core elements. One of them is education. One of the things that I've found, and I've been doing emergency management now for almost 35 years, one of the biggest things I have is if I can remove the dark curtain in front of these angry tsunamis and hurricanes, if I can remove the lack of understanding what they are, or if I can just educate the public, or find a way to educate the public into what they are, they're quite bright. I find out that I'm not the only smart guy in the world. They are able to take this information and develop their own understanding of how they have to go forward, or how they have to get out of the way of the storm. I mean, it's not rocket science. And then you teach them that, okay, well, what do you have for resources? And you start working with them in developing what they may have. And then how can it be used collectively? It's just module, we call them modules, but module after module just falls into place, and it trains them, and I don't want to even say trains them, because they find out on their own. They discover, is a better word, how to be more resilient. And it's really nothing more than taking roadblocks out of their way. And by that I mean, if there's a process or something in the way of them learning something, it's my job to identify it and remove it.
This is fascinating. So we have sort of a approach to learning that's a factor here as well, and we've got to localize the standard government material down to what applies to us, and make it interesting, and make it customized, make it owned by us as well in the local environments. And that makes me think, I wonder if in the Primo world, is there that opportunity to combine what New Zealand has, for example, for formal training and for actual training, what US has for formal training, as Kevin has done, and break it down to the local levels and make this digestible and understandable and applicable at the local level. Is that something Primo should take on as a applied educational function?
Well, absolutely. In the UN system, they already designated a number of centers, joint center for research in disaster risk reduction. So, for example, the Joint Center for Disaster Risk Reduction, of which I'm affiliated with in Mass University, is already been designated as one of the key centers for doing research on resilience across the Pacific and Asia. So Primo can play a role in terms of like bringing people together, but it's really up to governments to set up this network. We are very fortunate. We have what we call, and that's why I'm here, we have what we call the United States, New Zealand bilateral through what we call the Joint Commission meeting on science and technology. It's done at the highest level, where every year we have a meeting, at the highest level. Usually our delegation is led by either our ambassador in Washington, D.C., or our minister, or deputy prime minister for that matter. And that's where we sat down and work out where our strengths and weaknesses in terms of joint collaboration. So for example, I'm a member of the working group on climate monitoring, research, and observation work in the Pacific Islands, because from a New Zealand perspective, we solely rely on the data coming out from the tropical South Pacific to be able to do our forecasts and monitor tropical cyclone coming to New Zealand. But from the US side, they needed the data to be able to run their models, global models, in order to understand, for example, the El Nino Southern Oscillation. So there's a lot of this. There's no way that, like in the old days, you can be survived on your own. The global atmosphere does not recognize political boundaries. What happened in New Zealand or in the Pacific or elsewhere will impact somewhere else in the world. And that's the way we do things right now.
And we come back from our break. Let's talk a little bit about how that might translate down to a Waimanalo as an example versus, or
Right.
as a partnership with some equivalent size village in New Zealand, and see how the bigger picture fits down to that coupling together. But before we go to break, if I can offer this, I wanted to thank Kevin. You mentioned the importance of having information that's customized and personal attention, this sort of thing. I'd like to compliment you. First time I met you was about 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. And what we had was a situation very much like this, where a student, probably a junior in high school or sophomore or something, his father had wanted to have his son learn more about earthquake response. Set up a meeting at Civil Defense. I was invited in by Suzanne Verez. She invited us to be part of that. And I have never seen a more respectful discussion between a high school student and a senior partner in the world of thinking this thing through. And I thought the way you conducted yourself, it was so excellent with that young man. And I think that's probably changed his career path.
Well, I would find solace if it did. I mean, that's why I exist. But the bottom line is, I don't think. Well, I think before we go to break, real quickly, I just want one, because it struck me when you said that we're working with indigenous peoples and things of that nature. In my world, I don't recognize any differences so much as I just recognize a need to communicate. Right. And Frencha is clearly in the Hawaiian, Polynesian cultural thing. So it's not like I had to change any words. Right. I just had to respect the way she wanted to learn. And I think that's the clear message that I would put out. If you're going to work with anyone, understand who you're talking to first. Because she's really bright. And she does a lot of things. She's energized. But there are certain things we have to be able to make sure that I'm giving her in terms of respect for her to learn and at however she wants it, interpret however she wants it.
And so we'll extrapolate that to the Hawaii, New Zealand activity in a moment once we get back from break.
Thank you, sir.
Aloha, I'm Kili'i Akina, president of the Grassroot Institute and host on Ehana Kako, a weekly program on the ThinkTech Hawaii broadcast network. Ehana Kako means let's work together. Think of the sad alternative, let's not work together. Here in Hawaii, with all of our diversity and the richness of the people, it's important for us to come together around issues on the basis of what's right, and what's good, and what's going to serve the common good. And that's what we try to do at Ehana Kako. Every week, we interview movers and shakers, people in government, business, and other sectors of society to talk about how to create together a better government, economy, a better world here in Hawaii that can bless the rest of the world. I thank you for your attention to ThinkTech Hawaii, and we look forward to seeing you every Monday, 2 to 3 p.m. on the ThinkTech Hawaii broadcast network. We're Ehana Kako, and we wish you well. Aloha.
Friday afternoon in downtown Honolulu, folks. Ted Ralston here at the ThinkTech Hawaii studio, along with excellent guests as usual. Frencha Kalilimoku from Waimanalo, Penehuro Lafale from Wellington, New Zealand, and Keith Richards from Kailua, and also representing the state.
Yeah. It'd be
Kevin Richards. We'll call him Kevin Richards this time. He's not playing guitar for
I
us
was
today.
going to say, you'd
Yeah.
be surprised how many people call me Keith.
Okay. What we're talking about is this, is activities that have taken place in Waimanalo and the state that have been promoted by Frencha and by Kevin in terms of an awareness and a response and an application of disaster management techniques at the local level, localized where they can be adopted, understood, and embraced and owned by the local level, as well as how we're talking about exchanging ideas at even the climate science level and at the maybe even education training level between nations that are subject to the same issues in the Pacific. So it's a fantastic discussion so far. We always discover things on this show, and I appreciate you all for having said what you have said so far. But going back to that issue, it strikes me that a real value we can have in Primo is having active, not just people at the podium talking, not that they're not important, but having actual people, Waimanalo, for example, engaging with somebody in New Zealand right there in real time and in front of us. It's been going on all year. And in fact, we have a lot of amateur radio interest in Waimanalo now because
Correct.
of Frencha. We can do high frequency. We can communicate by radio directly with folks in New Zealand in the village. So if you can help us figure out some kind of a village, run an experiment for the next year on how this might all work and bring it to Primo next year as an example of how this reality can operate. I think that would be a great thing to propose to, I guess it's NOAA who is sort of watching over the whole evolution of, but it would benefit them too.
Oh, absolutely. And I just want to emphasize what he just said just before the break. At the end of the day, it's people that what matters. They are the ones. We can do all the talking at our level, the scientific level, political level. When disaster strikes, it's the people on the ground that matters the most. We learn a lot, for example, from what happened in Christchurch. It wasn't the government that came in, it was the neighbors, it was everybody, and people did not say, oh, I'm Maori, I'm Samoan, I'm New Zealand, what? It was just like people were responding just like good neighbors and families, and that's really, really crucial. And that sort of brings in the issue of like really good collaboration. Like in my situation, I work very closely with my North colleagues, and that's why I always come back here, and vice versa, they come down. But at the community level, that's where the action is going to take place. They know their environment. We can say so much and do all the hazards modeling and whatnot, but when something happens, it's them that is going to deal with it. And the power and the respect should go to those communities. And I will be delighted to help link up you, for example, with my colleague Cassie. She's from Naitahu, and in the South Island, which is one of the biggest Maori tribe. And she's done fantastic research on the resilience of Maori communities prior to, during the earthquakes, and after the earthquake. So the work is still going on, which is just absolutely brilliant. And one of the key lessons that we learned from, like for example, in the research in the leading up to the earthquakes, is to make sure that a lot of the material has been translated into the Māori language, in the local language. And it's not only encouraging the Māori communities to go back and learn about their language, but it was also sending a very strong signal to government that we need to engage in communities and looking at different ways of doing things rather than traditional or so-called Western way of doing things. And that's what we're doing right now.
And that's what we were talking about on the way in, exactly that issue. You and I were speaking about that this week several times at Primo, about the discovery or rediscovery or awareness of traditional ways of seeing the picture, and even to the point of advising. We're talking in the car on the way over and advising on the future. How do we think about the future in those perspectives? And that's what Kevin is starting to say here, that that's part of the translation, but it's also an extrapolation beyond that. And this is like very heady stuff to think that we can pull it off. But again, let's obligate ourselves to see if we can't find some way to tie together that thinking which you're leading on and where we need to go here in Waimanalo and bring that up in some kind of a report next year to Primo. I think that'd be a fantastic outcome. And so we don't forget what the immediate future is back in our government-based approach. You've got some actions coming up in the month of April, some
Well, yes, yeah.
significant actions regarding the month of tsunami awareness.
Tsunami Awareness Month has always been in April because of the April Fool's,
Right.
I think it's the 1964 event out of Alaska. I apologize, my memory's sliding, but we used that day, and it really became an issue across because NOAA was always trying to narrow it down to saying, okay, let's have a tsunami week for the nation. And Hawaii very much strongly said that no, ours is a month long and we do it in April. And since then, they've softened and they say, okay, everybody do what they want, and which is good for us because it allows us to do it. But suffice it to say, on April 1st, we normally get proclamations from the governors and the mayors of other counties, and we visit many of the schools that we can, and we have activities at the schools. We focus on the schools that are in the inundation zones or the evacuation zones. And we go there and we do a little science thing with them, and you know, we read out the proclamations and begin the process. And then we visit other schools throughout the month. There are approximately 32 schools that are in the Hawaiian Islands that are actually within this zone. Their requirements are a little bit above the normal school that isn't, which is the large majority. They must have an exercise every year. They have to have a plan. They have to have a much more structured response to tsunamis because they're at risk. So we emphasize a lot of activities with them. We encourage people to visit the Pacific Tsunami Museum, and we've just spent some
Where
money.
is that for
That's
folks
in
watching
Hilo,
this?
in Hilo on the Big Island. It's kind of a neat place. I think if you went there, you'd find it quite unique in terms of it is an old bank. And in fact, the vault, they turned it into their video room. It's kind of neat. But it lies in the area of the tsunami inundation that devastated Hilo. So, and they have historical exhibits as well as scientific exhibits, and it's more an awareness thing. And the visitors that come from there, and I've talked to many of them, they just weren't aware of how. And that goes back to how we operate. You know, once you learn something, you can gauge your own response to it, and you can develop your own response to it. And 9 times out of 10, or even more than that, 99% of the time, I think that people will make the right choices. We just got to give them the opportunity. And these things that provide that.
On that account, suppose there's somebody watching this from some organization that isn't a school that would like to have a visit and a discussion at a community level or a club level or something on the subject of tsunami
And I didn't
awareness.
pay him to say that. But the reality of that is I have so much support. Very qualified people that have degrees. And they'll jump at the opportunity to come out into an organized community somewhere, or a committee, or any venue, and present at the scientific level, at the emergency management level, at the experience level. I mean, we have incredible amounts of people out there that's what they live for, is to pass on messages to the public, or to anyone who's willing to listen, on how they can ensure their own survival.
Well, who do they contact to get some kind of a visit or some kind of a discussion?
Well,
like that, Kevin?
there are several. The only one that comes to my head right now is me.
You. Okay,
Yeah.
so how do we get a hold
So
of you?
you could actually do it a couple of ways. You could call State Civil Defense, now Emergency Management Agency, at 733-4300 and ask for Kevin Richards. I am the tsunami and earthquake planner for the state, so pretty much everybody that calls for any of those things end up at my desk anyway. And that's where we'll begin for now, because I'll tell you, any subject matter, we can find a PhD or an engineer or like I said, even a skilled professional that does emergency management or anything they need. This is a real subject that I don't think, well, they say plagiarism is naughty, but we can plagiarize anything in the safety world. And so when we have a message, we pass it on, because if it's going to save a life, you don't own it. we're going to pass it on.
So once again, 733
4300.
4300.
Yeah.
Talk to Kevin.
Yep, ask for
And
Kevin Richards.
any agency, any club, any school can get somebody to talk. And that's probably not just April, that would be true.
That's throughout the year.
But
Yep.
the focus is on April and the
Right.
awareness is on
Yep.
April because of the past and history. Fascinating, Kevin. And again, I can't thank you enough for the way your personality has come through in these many discussions we've had and meetings and training.
Ah, you're
And
just saying that.
I have, yeah. But that's what actually paid you to say. That wasn't the other part, right? So,
No, I do
And,
appreciate it.
okay.
Thank you.
And Frencha, we've got some
Yes.
activities coming up in June. We've got
We
Makani
do.
Pahili coming up.
We do, and with Vigilant Guard, and we're
Okay.
participating with that.
We're gonna get the hook in, but let me just propose we come back before June and talk about Makani Pahili and talk about Vigilant Guard and things and where the community can hook in there, just as they're gonna hook in with you next month on tsunami readiness. And Penny, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you
So
very
Frencha,
much.
please,
Thank
I'm
you.
so glad you're
Thank
finally able to come on. And folks, this is what she looks like and how she
Appreciate it.
is. Penny, thanks
Great
for
pleasure,
coming on.
Ted.
Thank you very much, sir.
Okay, and at that point, folks, we'll sign off. Ted Ralston here and our guest in downtown Honolulu at the ThinkTech Studios. We'll see you next Friday.